or good afternoon or evening, wherever you are.
Yeah,
Yes.
type in the chat where you're tuning in from.
So there's already 200 of you that have come out to hear about shapefiles. I find that pretty amazing, but thanks so much. We're honored.
Well,
You
it's not
feeling
surprising. I mean, it is one of the most, well, it is the most popular format out there, I guess. So
yes.
there'll be a lot of interest.
So are we all in our 80s apparel this morning?
I did my best. I
Yeah,
channeling the 80s with my neon headband.
I don't really do 80s, so.
Sadly, my 80s pink sweaters, and I think I had a few very narrow leather ties. If you remember, they were, well, maybe you're too young to remember. But anyway,
No,
but I did dig out my Atari shirt, so that counts for something.
Very cool. Oh, you know what? I could have brought, I have upstairs. It was like my mom's old like leg weights that you could tie like Jane Fonda style. And I have those. I should have brought them. How about in
Yeah.
the chat? What are some of your favorite 80s memories?
I guess we can argue that the shapefile really is an 80s thing because the DBF format goes back to then. So
that's
we
true.
aren't stretching too far.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Did
it's
you
sort of late 80s, early 90s. It's got that vibe. So movies from that era would be like Bill and Ted and thinking things like that, and Beverly Hills Cop. And
actually, I just heard that the largest grossing movie in the US was the original Jurassic Park last week, which came out in '93, about the same time as the shapefile.
there you go.
Oh, we could have done a Jurassic Park theme too.
Yes.
Well, I think it's past 10 o'clock now, so we should perhaps
Get rolling.
get
Yeah,
into
you
gear.
guys,
Yes,
you
get
guys
into
go
gear.
for it.
All right, I guess we'll turn off our webcams. They must be on, is that right?
Yeah, they are. I was going to suggest that too. Turn off the webcams to kind of save the bandwidth. But I'll also mention quickly that we do have Laura and Ryan behind the scenes helping us with some of the Q&A. So do take advantage of that chat panel there and type in all your questions and comments as we go.
Okay, and I'll get this big forehead off the screen as well. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in to this morning's webinar celebrating the shapefile. There's a little bit of fun to be had, but also some serious things as we look at this most popular of formats and kind of dig into some of the ins and outs. So thanks so much for joining us today. So my name is Dale Lutz. I'm one of the two co-founders of Safe Software, and I'm joined this morning by...
I'm Mark Island. I'm the FME evangelist, and I like to tell everyone how wonderful FME is.
And so Mark, were you a shapefile guy back in the day?
I wasn't really, no. In the 90s, I was more a CAD, and I was a land surveyor at that time. So I was more of a CAD type person.
Yeah, I was
CCAD actually from Germany. That was my big GIS from that period.
Which one was it?
CCAD.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I use that quite a lot. I got very proficient.
Well, your data is secure because I don't think FME ever was able to read SciCAD or CCAD, yeah, so it's still safe where it was started.
I think there was a reader at one point.
Yeah, maybe you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway,
I've been a shapefile fan since really 1994 or 5, because back in that era, it was really the only way in and out of the whole Esri world that was kind of accessible, because your other choices were E00 files or coverages, which at that time there were no libraries for. Mm-hmm. So I'm still pretty excited about Shape. And what about you, Mark?
Oh yeah, I mean so many users use it. You've got to be get into it really.
The customer is always right.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'll also mention that we're kind of giving a salute to the early days of PowerPoint. I did some research, and if you go back to the early 90s, that was kind of the dawn of PowerPoint and the dawn of excessive wipes and transitions. And so we're saluting that today as well, between our slides. We're joined today by a very special guest, the Twitter account for the Shapefile, and that account has been a source of inspiration for us at Safe. and we're just so pleased to have them joining us. I think they're in the studio audience. They said so on Twitter, but even if they're not, I have a feeling we're going to hear from the Shapefile from time to time, because it is arguably, it used to be the only active file format Twitter account. There's been some copies, XML file and cloud optimized GeoTIFF and some other ones like that. I think Geopackage has one. But if you want to follow a format that's going to be full of insights and the odd snarky remark, then I definitely recommend the Shapefile.
If you do want to follow that account, it's not spelled Shapefile, it's F-I-I-E, but they put an uppercase I in there to look like an L.
Don't you hate it when someone else takes your handle?
I know. Who would have thought, eh?
Yes. So we're from Safe Software, and I dug out our logos from the era when the Shapefile was born. So Safe has been around since 1993, and we make a product called FME. With time, we've refined our logos, and today our product is used all over the place. We exist to help all of you maximize the value of your data, and it seems like the audience has spoken, and shapefiles are ironically the place where it seems like at least a plurality of people feel like they need to be maximizing the value of their data. Because back to our serious pitch, we really exist to stop data from being locked away where it can't be gotten to, and get it out so that decision makers can use it. And I guess, Mark, I didn't even realize, but even old CCAD had the treatment applied to it back in the day.
That's right. So, I mean, you need to get your data out of a legacy system or into Shape or out of Shape. I mean, we're there to help move your data wherever it's going from and to.
Yes. So just a bit of background. We've been around since, I said, 93. That's more than 25 years. Yikes, my forehead didn't used to be this tall. But today there's more than 10,000 organizations that use us around the world. The sun never really sets on FME. There's 128 countries that have FME customers in them. And we have a big partner network that provides local service and FME expertise all over the place. So, and I would argue that every single one of those partners really are Shapefile experts as well.
Absolutely.
We have this new logo, we're ISO 27001 certified. That's my first time seeing that on a slide. So that's kind of exciting, and well done to the team to get us certified there too. So what is this FME we speak of? We say today it's an integration platform that consists of 3 parts. Really, the FME desktop, where you author and run things locally, and that's where we're going to spend most of our time today. FME server is where you take those rules, those transformations you made on the desktop, and put them up so they can be run automatically, either whenever some user takes an action or when a time expires or happens. And you can host that FME server on premises on Windows or Linux, or you can pay us by the hour and host it up on FME Cloud. And there's even a mobile play. If your FME server is accessible via the web, you can run something we call FME Data Express, which will deliver data to you in a rich way on your mobile device, including augmented reality stuff. And if you're interested in that, chime in and we can send you some resources, because it's pretty powerful with the free apps there as well. So that's the integration platform that we have. And it turns out that it's used a lot with shapefiles. So let's go to our polls for the first question. Stephanie, can you tell us what the question is?
Yes, we have, what's your opinion on shapefiles?
Wow.
We'll give it a couple minutes or a couple seconds here and let people get their responses in. Oh, so far, oh, it's jumping all around. Okay.
It is.
Give it maybe just a few more seconds.
I guess one thing is, go ahead, Mark.
So we said Shapefile is sort of a polarizing format. You either love it or hate it, but that's not necessarily what I'm seeing here in the results.
We have a lot more independence.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, votes are flying in. Let's close it down in 3, 2, 1, last chance. Okay.
Look at that.
There we go. So not many people really hate them, but perhaps the neutrals are just being polite. That's okay.
Well, I guess if you hated it, you wouldn't bother coming to a webinar
That's true. That's true.
So it may not be a fair test, but anyway, I'm glad that most of you, only 4% of you, would rather be somewhere else. And so thank you so much for joining us today. And if those of you that are neutral, we hope we can maybe squeak you into the camp of actually liking these things.
Well, I think we're going to take opposing sides here. You're going to talk about getting data into Shape, and I'm going to talk about escaping from Shape. So even if you're not a Shape fan, there'll still be something today.
It's actually great when you have such a pool of undecided voters. We get a chance to.
That's right. We can influence them, see who can come out top again by the end.
So, you know, this calls for me here to do the first demo. Let's go in hot before we really talk much more and do a demonstration. You're going to see later that one of the more popular formats to use with Shape is Excel. And I grabbed from the Vancouver Open Data last night this XLS file of community food markets and farmers markets. So here it is in all of its Excel glory with the street addresses and stuff. And I was really quite excited to see that they're very kind in Vancouver and they have a merged address field. So that sets us up nicely. And you know, if I wanted to send this to you, Mark, to use with your Shapefile reading software, what would you suggest I would do?
Well, use FME to convert it to Shape. That would be number one.
Let's do that then. So I'm just going to go, and here's that Excel file, and I've got FME Workbench started. I'm going to drag it on here, and I'm just going to say, yeah, that looks good. Let's let it rip. And FME starts up and gives me the sheet as what we call a feature type here. So here is the whole sheet, and I can do something called put FME into what we call feature caching mode, where at each step I can look at the data. So let's go ahead and run this and see what we have. And I get a nice table here that, again, whoops, I can just drag a little bit over. Yep, I got that merged address field. And Mark, what's it called when you want to basically put something at a location on the earth?
Would that be geocoding?
Yeah, so I can start typing on the canvas of Workbench, and I'm going to put down a geocoder, which is one of these things we call a transformer that lets me manipulate or augment the data. And I think that when people are going Excel to Shape, they're typically doing that because they want to augment things. And so I can pop open the geocoder, and I have to choose the service. And I'm going to wimp out. There are lots of high quality services that require you to have some kind of an account or a key. But if we're willing to go with the OpenStreetMap one, which is a little bit slower, but I only have a handful to do, then I can go ahead and do that. And I can choose an attribute value, and I'm going to geocode based on the merged address. And if I let that go, now I can run this, and we're in theory going to be going out and geocoding all of our, however many there's going to be, 22 or 40, whatever. I can't remember how many features I've got here to look at. Yeah, 43. So here it goes.
Perhaps ask if anybody is really new to FME. Just put it in the chat window or the question window. Just
yes.
Say hi.
So in this mode, I've got the visual preview here, and so I can see that I do have locations now. One thing that this also has about it is that I have this year column. So there's the food markets in 2019 and also in 2020 that are listed here. And so at this point, I think I'd be ready to try to go out to Shape. And so let's put down a Shape writer. So if I add a writer and I say Shape, here we go. And let's put the output, well, how about right there? Oh, and I'll put it in the markets folder. Okay, let's put it in there. And I'm going to tell it to define the shapefile by copying from the reader. So let's do that. And here we go. So I've got an output shapefile record, and I'm going to connect it up. And ooh, I see some red here, Mark. What do you think that means?
Well, I think that means that Shapefile has got limitations in its attribute definitions.
Yes. So here we have all the records that have values that they'd like to send over to the Shape, but they're just too darn long. and the shape limits you to 10 characters. So what we can do is a little known thing to right click on this link and say auto connect, because this isn't our first rodeo and we've seen this before. And that connects these across. And another trick that I know, Mark, you could say is best practice is to replace this link with an attribute manager, which actually explicitly does the renaming for me. And
That's
so,
yeah.
Yep. And lastly, I'm going to say just a little bit of showing off here. I want to make a different shapefile for every year. And so to do that, I can do what's called a fan out on the shapefile name. And I'm going to just let me put a couple spaces there, and I'm going to drag the year into here. And so these are going to be named something like 2020 markets, 2019 markets. We're going to separate the data out. I say that's okay. And then let's go ahead and run this whole thing, which actually only has to run from the end because the rest is cached, and we're done. And if I want to take a peek here, I can go into the file folder, and sure enough, there we have a whole bunch of nice shape files. And so that's basically a very quick demo. If you don't believe me, I should probably prove to folks that they worked. I will use the FME Data Inspector to take a quick peek at them. So here we go. We go File, Open Data Set, and whoops, I don't want to be looking at AutoCAD. Probably I should just have shape as the default since it's the most common. And if I go to here and Excel to shape into the markets, here we have both of my files. I open them up, and there they are in all their glory, indeed, on top of Vancouver. So that's the end of our first demo, Mark, and let's resume from there. In terms of the folks out there, how many of them are pretty new to FME?
Well, I don't see many comments or hands raised, so I'm guessing most people are fairly familiar with FME, so that's great.
Good. So we've already kind of gone with a hard introduction, but let's dig in a little bit more about our friends, the shapefiles. So turns out that they came out with ArcView 2.0, which was in development already in '92. So that's why giving shapefiles an exact birthday is a little bit hard, but for sure the world had them by '94. They were a public spec almost from day zero, which was a wonderful thing, especially if you're starting to write data translation software in 1994 or 5. And I looked up in our source code, and the first shapefile reader and writer made its debut in FME before it was even called FME in October of '95, written by none other than that XML guy himself, Mr. Don Murray, the other co-founder of Safe Software. And I think he's lurking in the audience somewhere. But anyway, Don, great job on that first reader and writer all the way back then. It was actually one of the first 5 formats we had. The other 4 were, and Mark, you'll be pleased to know, was IGDS or MicroStation, MapInfo, MIFMID, the long forgotten SAIF, the source of our name, and look at that, Esri SDE was in FME already at that time, and as I say, before it was even called FME. So that's that. But shape is not really a file. It's actually a collection or a collective of files, and this is even understating it because there are quite a lot of different sidecar files that can be in play. The main 3, the sort of trinity of shape, is the SHX, DBF, and SHP. DBF has the values, SHX is an index into the SHP, and you can optionally have a PRJ that tells you where in the world they are. So that's the coordinate system is in the PRJ. A little known trivia is that I'm told that in the early days, if you didn't have a PRJ and all the coordinates were between -180 to 180 and -90 to 90, they just assumed in Esri software that it was lat long. We've never implemented that shortcut, but the missing PRJ is often an issue. I know that our shapefile friend often talks about artisan handcrafted PRJs, which people do make them by hand, but we don't really recommend that.
And someone was asking in the question panel, is it okay to just switch one PRJ file with another one for your data set? And I think the answer there is probably no. That's not a good.
Well, it depends. You know, if you think you know better,
Yes, that's true. That's true.
But you better know what you're doing, or you can, this is by doing that kind of thing, Mark, is how I guess ships get sunk, or
yes, or satellites crash.
Yes.
Whatever. Yeah.
So you can do that, but be careful. I will admit that I have copied in a PRJ where there wasn't one before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But Paris Hilton asked on Twitter about 2 years ago to be told something she didn't already know. And so our Shapefile friend chimed in and commented that the modular architecture makes it very, very extensible. And I don't think there's any arguing with that. Do you think so, Mark?
Well, I mean, if you look at XML, what does the X stand for in XML? I mean, I'd say that's probably a bit more extensible than Shape.
Okay, well, we'll see what the audience thinks.
I'm being an XML fan there just for a bit. So.
Yeah, I guess you know where your bread is buttered. So the thing we ran into in my little demo was really the crux of the issue with shapefiles, and that is the use of the DBF file for all the attributes. DBF, I were commenting before we started, I think DBF goes back into the 80s. Feels like in the mid 80s I was doing some sort of terrible database course where the most expansive database we had to work with was DBase. And so all kinds of limitations creep into there. The length of the field names, they used to have to all be uppercase, but modern software forgives that. Once in a while, we do get people that want to make things uppercase, and you can use a bulk attribute renamer at Safe to do that. You're limited. I think Mark's going to show us an example where the string values being cut off at 254 is a bit of an issue.
Yeah,
is that right, Mark?
Yes, I am. I'll show that.
Yeah. Oh, nice that my dentist is telling me that I have an appointment. Good. And 255 is the max number of fields. That's literally, that ought to be enough for everybody. I don't know that that's too huge a hardship, but this next one can be a hardship if you're not careful with your string value length. If you say all your fields are 254, you quickly chew up that 4,000. So that's kind of, you need to put your shapefile on a bit of a diet there. So here's what our shapefile friend says about the field name limit, and the argument is that the contents are where information gets stored and not the field names. So don't know what folks think about that, but that's the argument there. The data types have gotten more over time, but really they're just a shorthand. It's a sleight of hand. And so there is a website that kind of Mark's going to reveal that kind of goes through some of the shortcomings of Shape. In the end, all of the numeric types are still stored as ASCII. So when you say double, that's just a nicer way of saying number 31, 15 or so. My experts at SAFE can correct that. Incidentally, we never said, we are joined today by some folks on Q&A. Laura is there to answer your questions, as well as the leader of the development team that's worked on Shape for most of his career, Ryan Prue. So if you have questions, you can ask them, and you can say, what really is double? What number pair is double? What number pair is short or long? And why were these added? If you want to know, all these things are there. There's also controversy around dates and date times. Mm-hmm. I don't think date times are really a thing in shapefiles. It's just a character string that's big enough to hold it, but I think dates actually are a thing. Does that sound right to you, Mark?
It does, yes. And I think we've got an option in FME on how you want to handle date times.
Yes. There's no nulls. Incidentally, that's one of the issues on attribute types, is that there are no nulls, and that is sad in today's world. There's the usual cast of characters as far as geometry goes. What's notably missing is any mathematical arcs. So even though it was arc view that this came out of, you actually couldn't view arcs. So that's kind of interesting, but sometimes people try to restore the arcs, and maybe Mark will show that if you're escaping from Shape. But this business of only one geometry per file can be something that gets folks in trouble from time to time. Oh, but there's always, you can always have null geometry. There's no problem there. So now moving into a few things with how Shape and FME interact. We just looked at our usage stats to get a sense. And you can see that with time, the percentage of writers in FME that are shape is slowly increasing, but it looks like there was definitely a spike heading into 2016. And here's the raw number of times from our usage stats, and it feels like we may be past peak shapefile. So I'm going to call peak shape would have been 2016 in terms of the raw number of times people actually put it down. And on the writer side, it looks like we have a slight trend down. So that means as a percentage of things people are doing, there's less escaping from shape than there used to be. And once again, we see a spike in 2016, but maybe a little bit less of a dramatic decline. So anyway, peak shape definitely looks like we're past it. But you add all that in, and from the folks that give us usage stats, shape has been added more than 13 or close to 13 million times. So that's a lot of times. And so Don, you must feel pretty good having written some software that's been used that much. Pretty amazing. The most used writer in FME is the shape. We hinted at that, weighing in at 38%. And you can see who the other contenders are in terms of where in general people seem to go. The masses do. Excel is very strong, and file geodatabase as well. And on the reading side, shape is the most used reader, but not by as much, about a quarter of all translations. And you can take a look there, AutoCAD edging out Excel for that. And that I think is in the last 365 days, these stats here. So Stephanie, you're going to take us back to the polls.
I am. Oh, hang on here. Launch poll. Right. So we're asking, why do you use shapefiles? And you can pick all of them that apply.
Well, kind of not tongue in cheek, but the second one is probably the one that gets people in there so much that it's just so widely supported because it was the most documented early format. It had first mover advantage, and once you're in, you're pretty much in. But anyway, I guess the poll is underway.
It is. I'll give people a few more seconds to vote there. There was a question that came in too. Do you foresee a new shapefile format based on XML?
Well, I don't. Maybe Mark and Don do.
Yeah, I'll see if you can guess who sent that question.
Oh.
That would be very interesting, for sure.
Well, there is actually a sidecar file that ends in XML that can be along with the shapefile that has metadata in it. So really, it's there for everybody. So what do we have here for results? How would you analyze these, Mark?
Well, I think love them or hate them, really, it's because it's so widely supported. That's why people use them. But I like to see that thing there because my customers ask for that format. So 50% of people are using shape just because of that. So that's important. People are still asking for that.
Yep. The customers are always right, and so that's that. Yeah. I do like that 12% really believe that it is the best format. So thank you to the 12% for being brave. So now we're ready to get into shape. So let's take a look at a couple of examples there. But first, a little shout out to the Shapefile, who chimed in 2019. Scientists, give it a scientific word and tell us what it is. And so Shapefile is a noun, the world's foremost de facto standard to convey geospatial data and information. Look at that. I'm not sure I believe the last part of the Shapefiles, maybe a little bit exaggerated there, but let's keep that in mind as we look about getting in. And if we look at our stats, where are people coming in from? Overwhelmingly, they're coming in from AutoCAD. I was quite surprised to see this. This was in the last year. Half of the times people are going to shape, it's with AutoCAD, and almost a fifth of the time it's from MapInfo. And so with that, we'll go in and do a couple more demos. So
quickly mention while you're setting your demo up, these statistics are coming from user feedback. So there's an option in FME, you can turn it on to say, I'll supply feedback to save. And it tells us what transformers you're using, what formats you're using. So this is how we know what percentage of readers and writers use Shapefile.
And it does help us, on a serious note, it really does help us to make sure that we're focusing our development efforts on the things that people actually use the most. Of course, we have the long tail at SAFE and we have to support everything, but it's not surprising that the Shapefile has had a lot of love over the years given its dominance. So here I have a MIF file, map info file, and I'm going to just use the little data set icon there to take a quick peek at it. And these are some homeless shelter locations in Vancouver, and with nice schema and so on. And I'm going to translate these to map or to shape. And notice I dragged in the input, and once again I'm going to add a writer for setting up the output. And I do this because when you're coming from a format like map info into shape, it's good practice or to not have FME generate the workspace for you. If you tell FME, please generate for me, FME says, well, gee, in map info, there could be 6 different types of geometry. And so it generates you 6 different output files, one for each, and it gets quite messy. So I just pop things down and then drag them across. And here I again get into this issue that we showed before where the names don't line up. And so then I once again do the little dance where I say auto connect them, and then I further do the dance of saying let's replace the link with an attribute manager, and I do that because I can go in up. Now I go in here, and right now these are set as manual. That means I've set this up to be these names, and I have to fiddle with it if I wanted to change it. But I can also go to automatic mode, in which case it's going to take whatever's coming in to be the truth. And so I'm going to go back into here in automatic mode, and I'm going to clean up these names to not be truncated quite so badly. And the meals provided one, for example, I'm just going to cut these. These are sort of Booleans that are logical ones. And pets, there we go. Let's just call those good. And when I do it that way, you can see that the output already changed. And I'm just going to double check. Some of these are logical Boolean values. And so if we take a peek again at this input, we see that we have values like yes and no. And if I go ahead and I'm just going to run this whole thing to the end, and then I'm going to look at my output shapefile, we see that the Booleans have been changed to true and false. So anyway, that's just a very, very quick look at getting into shape from map info. And again, I'm recommending to not generate the workspace automatically. The second example I wanted to just show, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this, is an AutoCAD to shape example. And here I had, if I just view the original input file, a CAD file that had a bunch of labels in it. And if I zoom in super tight, so I've got polygons with labels. If you tuned into our CAD webinar recently, you saw us deal with this. So I've got 2 labels inside of each one. One of these labels is the parcel ID, and the other one is the folio number. And I extract their properties into attributes, and then I do an overlay. So if I run to here, I can basically get the attribute values out of, if I click on this one, I've extracted the parcel ID and the folio into these area features. And then I can go ahead and lastly output these. I get rid of anything that didn't have at least 2 points in it, and let's just go all the way to the end and give me some parcels. And if I view the output data set, there they are. And now I have parcels that have the PID and folio. A very common kind of thing, I'm going CAD to GIS, AutoCAD to shape, and doing some data augmentation along the way. And so if that's something that's of interest to you, then I would recommend that you go into the archive, safe.com/webinars, go into the archive and look at our one from May the 13th, where we spent a whole hour doing examples like this, and they all would work just great with shapefiles. Okay, so while Mark's disappearing, we'll just take a quick look at the most popular destinations. Where do people go to from shape. And so AutoCAD, again, very, very high. And I think Mark's going to, provided he can get his display to work, AutoCAD was a main place there. And tab files are another place where people go out to map info, and actually MIF as well. Personal Geodatabase really surprised me. That's the older Esri format. I was surprised to see that in the game. KML, Excel, and again, file geodatabase. So those are the places. I think PostGIS also. I'm going to keep going on the presentation. Mark's going to do some demos.
I think I'm back now. So, okay, fantastic. So we are going to look quickly at getting data out of shape, escaping from shape, just like escaping from New York in that movie of the time. So let's have a look how we can do that. So I've got some shape data. Let's see, I've got some property polygons. I'm just going to drag that and drop it into FME and read that data. And we can see some of the things that Dale was talking about earlier with TextHistor and TextHis00 as my attribute names, which says to me that the names have got a bit mangled, but also that perhaps text history spilled over from 255 characters. So the creator of this data set decided to spill it over into a separate attribute. So we're going to have to put those back together again. Another thing, we don't have a coordinate system defined for this, so we've got that to overcome. So there's a few things we need to overcome to get this data out of shape and into something, into some other format. So I'm going to put an attribute manager transformer down here, and I'm going to do the fairly usual things that we do in FME, rename attributes. I'm not sure what text coord is meant to be. Maybe it's text coordination. That's an issue with truncating your attribute names like that. Sometimes it can be a little bit too cryptic. I'm going to create a new attribute here called text history, and I'm going to do that because then I can concatenate the other two attributes together. So let me open up a text editor for that attribute, and we'll add together TextHistor and TextHis00, which I believe are the two parts in that order. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move that up. We can move things up and down in this, and that's because the actions occur here in the order that they are listed from top to bottom. So basically I'm saying create this new field called text history, and then we can delete those two afterwards. Whereas if we deleted them first, we couldn't create the text history after. So that's why I moved that about in there. So that's cleaned up the attributes. And as Dale said, sometimes you need to do bulk attributes, and we can do that with a bulk attribute renamer. So if it all came across in uppercase, we could say, actually, let's rename all of these back to lowercase or title case, whichever we wanted, and that would work on whatever was coming in. So that's another useful tip. Where are we going to escape to? Well, let's say we're going to escape to a database. Let's go with PostGIS. So I'm going to add a PostGIS writer in here. I've got a connection already set up to a database online, and we can see all the different parameters that we've got in here that let us control how we create and write that table. Like Dale did, I'm going to make this an automatic schema, so it takes the changes automatically from the attribute manager. And it'll come up with this, and we will call it demo parcels. And I'm going to set it up to drop and create the table every time, just in case we need to run this a couple of times. I don't want to keep adding data again and again. So I'm going to ask it to drop the table. So there we go. That's pretty much all we need to do to escape from shape into PostGIS. What I might do now is come back to the definitions and turn it back to manual and say, actually, we should make text history a little bit bigger just because we know it's not 254 characters or less. So we'll make it 500, which seems a reasonable idea. And we can also set a coordinate system. We could set it on the incoming data and say, well, I know this data is lat long 84, or we could set it on the writer as well. I'll set it on the reader, and that way we know, FME will know now that the data coming in is in a lat long 84, even though it didn't have a PRJ file as part of that. So now I can run this workspace and we'll write that data out to our PostGIS database, and in a few seconds it should have finished, and we can just read that back just to make sure it was okay. And this is reading back directly from the database. It's not reading a cache in FME, and we can see we've got our fields there and they've got the correct coordinate system because it was recognized coming from the source data. But the nice thing about FME is we support so many different formats in the output, like for example a geodatabase, excuse me, we could write to. But obviously one of the formats we talk about, or is talked about a lot as a replacement for Shape, is Geopackage. So let's have a look at that. So I'm going to add the Geopackage writer. I'm going to specify just to write it to an output folder, and we'll just call it parcels. And again, we're going to with an automatic schema definition. And excuse me, we'll call it parcels table, and it's made up of polygons. So there it is. We just need to connect that up, and there we go. Now we've got a Geopackage as well as a PostGIS, which is great. Now, of course, sometimes we have more than one shapefile coming in, like different schemas. So what I'm going to do now is add another one, which is a points shapefile. And here's my property parcel points, which is basically just an address data set for the parcels. And we're going to go through the same thing with the attribute manager, because we can see that the names are a little bit obscure or messed up on the incoming data. So we'll call that street name, and because we don't have any 10-character limitations, we can call this property parcel IDs, and this is site ID. Oops, don't want to be all uppercase. Street number, and we'll just call it locality, like so. So we could write that to the same table. Maybe we'll write it to a different table, and it's fairly easy to do, or very easy to do. We just click writers, add feature type. As Dale mentioned, the feature type really is just our name for a table. So we'll call this one addresses. And I could write it to the PostGIS writer or the Geopackage. I'm going to write it to the Geopackage writer. And again, we just say this is a point data set. And there it is. So now we just connect that up, and it's all set up. So now we can just run this, and we will get the Geopackage. So let's just run that. Oops, did I do that right? Yeah, I did that right. I thought for a second I got the connections wrong. So this is our Geopackage, and I'll put what we call a bookmark around there. So let's just do that. And this is our PostGIS. Now, say for the PostGIS, we didn't want to write both tables. Maybe we want to merge the data together. Well, that's pretty straightforward as well. We can just use a transformer called the feature merger. And in this case, the polygons are requesting information that the point features are going to supply. We're going to join it together with the site ID, which is a common key between the two. Just check that box just in case there's duplicates, and run that transformer by itself. And you can see we got 1915 matched records, so 1915 parcels have a matched address. 4 of them didn't, but we can write that anyway. And we got 3 addresses without parcels. Well, I'm going to write those as well. Even though they're point features, we can still write point and polygons to the same table in PostGIS. And all I really need to do is switch this to automatic and back to manual just to pick up the earlier attributes. Let's change the text history again back to 500. And as we saw before, we need to auto connect the attributes. I think we need to do it on every, there we go. So we've auto connected all of the attributes. So everything's connected up now, and we're happy with that. And we can just basically run that part, run the writer, write to PostGIS. Again, we're writing polygons and points all to the same table. And we should be able to see that if we look at the output, which should come up in a second. So these top three features are the points, and the ones after it are the polygons. And we've got all of the data merged together with the address and the text history now. So that's how we might escape from Shape into another GIS format, and some of the sort of hoops we'd have to jump through to manage the shape data. The other thing we might do is write to CAD, and CAD is a little bit different because there's a few different changes you might need to make. So let's say I'm reading from a shapefile this time, and in fact what I'm going to do is read a whole bunch of shapefiles from a roads data set. And instead of having layers in the shape, we've actually got multiple shapefiles, which is how that works. So I'm going to select all of those to read. And because they're all the same schema, I don't need 7 different objects on the left-hand side. So I'm going to click this button here that says single merged feature type. And what that does is it says, okay, well, they're all the same schema, so let's just show it all as a single object in here. And we can see they're all the same schema. We can look in here and it will tell us what that schema is. So there's a long, and one other thing we can do, by the way, if I just go back and add another shapefile reader, I'll just show you this parameter we've got that says, how do you want to handle the attributes? Do you want to use the standard types, like we'd see they were called long or short or whatever, or do you want to be more explicit about that? And if I say, well, I want to be a bit more explicit, we'll just open one file here. What we would see is that FME is using number 60 instead as the schema. So it's a bit more schema aware if you change that setting. And I think that would be helpful, especially when you're writing to a different format. Anyway, so we're reading some data there. You can see the attributes we've got was arc, road color. So as we said before, you don't get support for arcs in Shapefile. So somebody's obviously taken this from CAD, put it into Shape, but they've kindly remembered to save the information about was it an arc feature and what color it was. So we're going to deal with that by putting a tester in here and checking to see, is the was arc attribute got a value of yes? In other words, somebody's kindly recorded that information and we can turn it back into an arc with this arc estimator transformer. In fact, to be honest, we could just route everything into the arc estimator, and if it wasn't an arc, it would just come out a rejected port anyway. But we'll do it this way just for the sake of using that attribute. And well, let's just type for stylers, because we get a lot of styler transformers in FME when you're writing to specific formats like Excel or MicroStation, or in this case, we're going to write to AutoCAD. So we've got a specific transformer for styling data when it goes into AutoCAD. I'm going to connect that data up, and I can set the color. So I can say, well, we've actually got a color attribute, so let's use that. So we'll use the road color, and that tells us what color it used to be before it got put into Shape. We can do other things with the lines as well. We could set the line weight to be, say, 50, which is 0.5 of a millimeter. We could even make that conditional on the road type. So we could say if road type equals arterial, then the line weight should be 140. Otherwise, just set it to a default value of 50. So we can even set things up conditionally inside here. Okay, well, we better actually run that workspace and write it out to some AutoCAD. I could write it to AutoCAD 3D object data, although not on a Mac. It's not supported on there. So what I'm going to do is just write it to a plain AutoCAD file. And with that, the parameters, I'm going to set it to write the attribute information as extended entity. So let's do that. And I will find a place to write it to. I should write it to the output folder just to be consistent. Roads.dwg. And I'm going to read the schema, copy it from the reader, as Dale also showed before. So we connect that up, and everything matches quite nicely there. Of course, what we don't really need is we don't need the was arc attribute because we dealt with that. We don't need the road color because we dealt with that. And we don't need the road type because what I'm going to do is the same trick that Dale showed earlier, is instead of having a fixed name for my layer, I'm going to set it to an attribute called road type. So now I'll get a different layer in my output for every road type. And we'll just hit the run button on that and run it very quickly. And it should write that out to AutoCAD. There's the AutoCAD file, roads.dwg. What I'm going to do is use an online viewer, the Autodesk viewer. And you'll see I've tested this already, so I'm fairly sure it's going to work. So there's an online viewer. I just wanted to do this just to prove that it is actually creating the output in AutoCAD rather than just me showing it in the FME data preview. So very quickly going to do this because I'm aware we're running out of time. But if I query this now, we should see that this is an arc feature in red on the arterial layer. This one is an arc feature on a private layer, and the lines will probably just be 2-point lines. That one's in white on a residential layer. So there we go. So back to the presentation. Where are we? Staying in shape. Dale, do you want to?
Yeah, we'll just talk quickly. You can go ahead and present there, Mark. But
okay.
It turns out that a lot of people use FME to go shapefiles to shapefiles. And so go ahead to the next slide. We find that in terms of pairwise, 40% of all of our translations by pairwise are shape to shape. And so Mark and I were trying to understand why would people be doing that? Are they using FME as an expensive file copier? But no, there's a bunch of things that could be going on there. And I think if we just go to the next slide, we can look at some of the reasons why. As you saw, FME has a broad library of tools for working with data. So one of the things, there's a geometry validator. If you want to do that, there's a variety of cleanup tools and intersection tools and topology making tools, dissolving tools. If people wanted to fiddle with the schema, the FME is a great tool for that, shape to shape and adjust the schema, make it better. There's spatial index things we'll get into in a minute. And then there's also enriching the data to add measures or bring data from outside and work with that. And so why would they use FME for this? Is because there's all those transformations that we have, plus there's the automations that we can bring to the table and the ability to do it en masse. And so I think, Mark, you had an example, but I don't know if we'll show it. What was your example going to be?
It was just a very quick demonstration of reprojecting data in a batch way. So let me see if I've got the workspace very quickly. I've already got them open. So this is the workspace I've got. It's just a basic shape to shape file, reading a whole bunch of shape files. I'm writing them back out to shape. But the interesting thing that we're doing here is we're reprojecting from one coordinate system to another.
Yeah.
So I could do it all in one workspace, but what I do is I have a batch controller, and what this does is it reads all of the shape files in a folder. It doesn't read the data in them, it just reads the names of them and passes it into the workspace. So now I can see I've got all of these different shape files in that folder, and I say just pass it to the workspace I just showed you, the working one that does the reprojection. And the reason we do it this way is because then we can run up to 7 concurrent processes, and in theory process a whole lot of data 7 times quicker than if we just run all of the data through the same single workspace.
And I think the key observation there is that the reader that you're using is something we call the path reader in FME, which just kicks out one record for every file that comes across.
That's right. It just picks out, I say, pick a folder, here's my folder, and it will return a feature for every file it finds in there.
Yeah,
Startup shape.
Excellent. So that's just, one of many, many things that people could be doing, going shape to shape. It's just really you're limited only by your imagination. So let's carry on. We got just a couple minutes left to talk about some other things about shapefiles in FME. We had this idea about what if we took all this and compressed it, go ahead, Mark, to the next slide, into a single file that's called a chisel file. And so that's just a zip file that has everything in it. And go ahead to the next slide. There's an option inside of FME for creating these. So if you don't like everything littering your desktop, you can do this, and we'll compress one per layer. We'll read them back as well. And it turns out we're not alone in this support, because our open source friends have added the same capability in Goodle and QGIS. Goodle as of 3.1. And so as long as your QGIS is using a 3.1 Goodle, you can point at those chisel files and they'll work. We just need to lobby Esri, and all of a sudden we've got ourselves truly a shapefile. So that's that one. Let's keep on going. In FME, there are 3 different shapefile readers. The original one that Don wrote is called Shape. It's quite old. With time, we made one called Esri Shape that addressed some fundamental issues that we couldn't just fix in the old one. So we made a new one, and then most recently there's one called Shapefile, which is the one that we just came out with about a year ago. You can tell if you're an older user of us, in terms of our long-time user, you can tell which one you're using by looking in the navigator pane. If it says Shape, you're using the original, and then you can right-click and say Update Reader, and then answer the questions, and you can keep doing that until you get to Shapefile to get all the modern goodness there. So that's what I wanted to kind of point out. Yeah. So keep on going. On the spatial index side, we used to need, first of all, we used to not be able to create these on write. Then we needed ArcGIS present. Today we can create these without ArcGIS, so you can make an SVN, spatial index, or a QUIX file, or both, and this allows very speedy access to large shape files if you're doing spatial queries. So we'll go ahead from there. And yes, a little salute out to the QUIX. Since we're in the 80s, I'm curious how many people in the audience actually played QUIX back in the day. It does look like a spatial index, actually. And I wonder if our QGIS friends were inspired by that game. Do a show of hands, or chime in if you're a QUIX person, and let us know. That was a great Atari game. File size limits, officially 2 gigabytes is all she wrote, which gives you about 70 million points. And FME will split automatically. If you're feeding us more big data, we'll just keep making more files, adding 0001 onto them. Unofficially, Mark and I remember back in time, the end of innocence, we said, when we were given from somebody a shapefile that was bigger than that, and we actually modified FME to be able to handle it. I think ArcGIS could, because although the spec says something is a signed integer, it's really unsigned. And so actually, you should be able to do 4 gigabytes, but not all things support that, so we try not to.
Yeah. Well, some FAQs here. Shall we quickly run through some of these?
Yes, if folks have to leave, thanks for joining us. We appreciate you coming out to hear all about shapefiles on a otherwise nice summer day. But if you're able to hang around, Mark and I will go through some of these and also answer some questions along with the panel, and we'll actually get the panel on here in a second as well. But
we have a quick server demo as well coming up. So
oh yes. Okay, so yes, FME can read just a .shp if it's somehow stranded without its friend. So so yeah, we try our best to read corrupt shapefiles. Our spec usually is if ArcGIS can read it, we will too. But
yeah. And I think if it's just the SHX file, the index that's corrupt, we can still read the main contents of the file. It depends what's corrupted and how badly, but I know we've got a lot of functionality built in over the years because we've had shapefiles for so long. We've built in protections against what corruptions we can fix.
We've seen every bad data file that there is, pretty much, Mark.
Yeah, pretty much. And we do have a DBase reader, so we can read DBF files by themselves.
Yep. And actually support some of the more modern extensions in DBase, which are not supported in the shape spec, but that's good.
Yeah.
We're pretty encoding aware, so actually when Mark and I were working on Macs today, and FME does work, of course, primarily on Windows, but on Macs we can work, and I noticed we always put out the UTF-8 code page when we are producing shapefiles on a Mac, just so that if we give it to our Windows friends, they'll not be surprised.
Yeah, for sure. And metadata, I don't think the shape reader and writer handles metadata, but we do have the XML reader and writer that you can read it, update it, plenty of XML transformers to handle that. So in one way or another, yes, we can read and write those XML metadata files.
I will chime in. One of the folks online suggested that we should allow like aliases or longer names for some of the shapefile contents, and we could pull that off by writing those longer names as aliases into the XML, and I think ArcGIS would support it. And if we get our open source friends to support it, suddenly we'd break free from the 10-character limit by a little bit of sleight of hand.
Is this how shapefiles lasted so long then? It's just incremental improvements like this and just keeps prolonging life, yeah.
Yeah, and we talked about the spatial index. We will use these as well. And I see Dawn chiming in, commenting how XML is beautiful and perhaps holds the key to shapefiles' next journey in life. And if people compress their shapefiles with just about any compression software known to humans, what happens, Mark?
We will read it appropriately and we can write them out appropriately as well.
Yes.
It's very useful for doing things with server, as we'll see in a moment, to be able to read a zip file. And
date times, yes. You have some other things you want to talk about the date times?
Well, I think because times aren't supported in Shapefile exactly, so I think there's an option when we read and write to say, actually, can you write this as write all the date times as a string instead of a date attribute? So there's actually parameters in the reader and writer to handle those.
Yes. And can we put a raster in a shape? Somebody challenged me before this to ask if we can do this. The answer is no. There is no raster sidecar. I know the @shapefile Twitter account is pushing for there to be a TIFF in there to store it. But you can use an FME, and I won't show the example, but there's a raster to polygon coercer that'll thread. If it's a thematic raster with just kind of integer values of different themes, you can turn them into polygons and then dump them out that way. So that's kind of a cheat, but yes, you kind of can. So what else do we have, Mark, as we wrap her up here today?
Well, we have this escape the shape example, which is an FME workspace published to an FME server app. It will convert your data to one of several formats and reproject your data to one of several coordinate systems. So let's just have a quick look at that, shall we? I'll just show you the workspace first, because it really is very simple.
I see Stephanie shared the link with everybody, so go ahead, folks, and let's try to bring Dawn's test server called Blue Sky to its knees by dragging shapefiles up there. So Mark, tell us how this works.
Well, really all we're doing is reading Shapefile and writing out to what we call a generic format. So on the reader side, we're just saying, read any shapefile. It doesn't matter what it is, just read it, read the attributes, and we'll be happy. And on the writer side, the generic format is a dynamic one, so it will write out any attributes it's been given. But more than that, the generic format lets you pick which format of data you want to write to. Oops. So let's see. The output format can be any format that you like. I've set it up to be limited to a certain number of formats. Let me find the page. So yes, if you go to the escape the shape page, it should look something like this. And all we need to do there is find a shapefile that has been preferably zipped up.
Or chiseled.
Or chiseled, yes. So I could take the chiseled shape, drag and drop it into there. I can pick my output format. Again, this is just a sample representation of a few formats that FME will support. Any particular format you like there, Dale?
I really like map info.
Okay, let's go to map info, and we could write it to any coordinate system we like, but since I know this data's in BC, we'll use the Albers coordinate system, and we can run that, and we'll get the data download, which we can open up, and it will open up on one of my windows. There it is. So there's our map info tab, equivalent of the shape data. So I'm not sure how long I'm going to leave that up there. It'll probably be quite a while, to be honest, and this server runs all the time. So if ever you feel the need to escape shape format and you don't want to sit and make your own workspace, you can just come to this link, fme.ly/escape the shape, and you can get your data out of shape and into one of the most popular formats that we support.
So Mark, I have to ask, how much HTML coding did you do to build this beautiful site?
I wrote no HTML at all, no JavaScript, nothing. This is just an FME server app. Did you want me to open up server and?
Sure, because folks may not understand that once you make these workspaces that Mark and I were creating, it's very easy, if it makes sense, to turn them into a server app, and then anyone in your organization can use them. We call that democratizing access to data. So in your own site, you could make your own escape from shape. Mark will supply this workspace.
So yeah, so what I would have done would just create the workspace, hit the publish button, and send it to the server, and it would arrive here, and there it is, and my last published workspaces. So I could run it within server like this, and I got my own options there, and so on and so forth, and I can set the job queues I want to run it on, and all sorts of different things. But that's only if I've got a login to FME server. If I want to make it available to anybody to use, I can create what's called a server app. And here I created one again called Escape the Shape. And all it does is say, create me an app to run this workspace, and I will give the users certain permissions. I would give them access to whatever parameters I want them to see, and customize it. I can give it a customized title and header and an icon. I don't know if you noticed the icon is a little shape file with a stop sign through it, and that comes up on there. So I can create that. It will give me a URL. That's the full URL. I just created a shortcut to it, fme.ly shortcut, which is not part of server by standard. But now that means anybody can run that workspace, even if they don't have an account. They don't have to log into that server. They can just come to this page and run it.
Excellent. So just to close us down then, what else do we have to say?
Well, sorry, go ahead.
I think our next thing was just to remind people that couple of calendar dates. There's something special on December the 3rd, and the next slide tells us why. If you search on Google for Shapefile Day, Google will tell you that December the 3rd is the Shapefile Day, and you can go to the next slide. Again, thanks to our friend, the Shapefile, for being part of the webinar.
Oh, I just clicked on it by mistake, but that's what it takes you to.
Yes. The Shapefile declared it, and because there's so many sidecar files, there's 12 or more, and 3 of which are needed. So that's why we're at December the 3rd for Shapefile Day. So keep that in mind. But closer up, we have some other dates.
Yeah. So what are those dates, Dale?
Well, webinars galore, and let's just take a peek at what's coming up in. So Don is maybe still online to invite you all to come to the XML-a-thon that he and Dean, if you love XML at least as much as you love Shape, you'll want to be tuning into that. It's bound to be entertaining, and I have a feeling however much we're going over time, they're going to go even more. What do you think?
So. I think that's why it's called an XML-a-thon. It's as long as people have questions, they're going to keep going.
Yes, so I can tell Don is excited about that. So that's July the 8th. You'll definitely want to, I guess, get some snacks handy and be ready to stick that one out. And as long as they're done in a day, the very next day, Don and I are going to be doing the Calm and Connected launch of FME 2020.1, which would have been shown at our user conference had our user conference happened last week. On Earth Prime, that's where it did, but otherwise we're going to do this webinar. So I'm just hoping that Don's done his XML-a-thon in time, or he can just flow right into this, maybe.
That's right. He might go for 24 hours. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, there's a lot of things you can talk about with XML.
It's extendable.
It is. So.
Yes. So that's that one. And I think we have one other webinar we wanted to highlight. Kind of on a more serious note, if you are someone in the Esri environment, there's a lot that FME can do to help you get even more out of ArcGIS Online. And there's some new things actually coming out in FME 2020.1 that actually even add to that. So please don't forget to sign up for that. I know that Laura, who's helping answer the questions today, is going to be doing a great job with her team presenting that day. I think Laura and Sienna, I can't remember exactly who, but for sure the XML webinar will be done by then, so they should have no trouble.
Yeah. Were there any other questions that we had today?
Let's just take a last look at the questions before the sing-along that we promised. This should get people to leave if I start threatening the sing-along, but how about Laura, was there any that you wanted to highlight?
We're putting her on the spot there.
Oh yeah, just getting my mic going here. Let's see. Yeah, not a lot here. So there are a lot of good questions. There were a couple about supporting annotation in Shapefiles.
Yes, if you've got annotation as a point feature with a label in the attribute, there's a label point replacer transformer that we could use in Workspace to turn it into a real label.
Yeah, the best you can do in the shapefile format itself is have some convention where you store a rotation as a column. I've seen people do this, a rotation and a size and then a string, and then you hope that your rendering software can be talked into using those. Yeah. Okay. I think that looks like Laura's kept up with everybody along the way. Thanks, Laura.
Yeah, I don't see many questions that weren't answered. So yeah, that's fantastic.
Yes, Laura was definitely kept really busy. So thanks so much, Laura, for all your hard work there. I was just going to mention, if we didn't get to your question, or if you're taking this knowledge away and then find that you have questions after the fact, you can reach us at safe.com/community. It's where all our experts hang out, and you can ask them and post questions anytime. So don't be afraid if you have more questions that come later. We have ways to answer them.
And I see that someone asked a hard-hitting question. Why did I say Goodle instead of GDAL? And there's a long story online about that, but Safe actually, I'm so old that I knew Frank Warmerdam, the founder of Goodle, before he worked at Google. And so in the beginning, Frank called Goodle Goodle, but when he worked at Google, he found it too confusing, and so that's when it changed to GDAL. So I think Frank says it'll answer to either name, but that's the story there. But with that, Mark, are we ready to wrap this baby up?
Ooh, do you really want to?
We promised the fans there's 220 people that want to hear the sing-along.
So I don't know that they want to hear it, but I think they might have to hear it. So are you going to join in if I sing?
How about I do the last 3 lines?
Okay, that will do, I guess. And anyone at home, you can sing along too.
Okay, cue the music.
Okay. Yo, SHP. Shape, shape, baby. I gotta find my cue. Stop. I think I've lost already. I think I'm totally lost already. I lost my cue. So
the intro was great.
Let's just do it without the music, shall we?
Yes.
All right, stop. Collaborate and listen. Esri is here with a brand new invention. Shapefile grabs a hold of me tightly, storing my data daily and nightly. Will it ever stop? I don't know.
Though arcs and topology you have to forego, and 2 gigabytes at all I can handle, but I do support strips or fans or triangles. Here we go. You know, I'm reminded, I don't know who's online that remembers Peter Sellers with his famous reading of It's Been a Hard Day's Night, but this is what this reminds me of.
It does sound like that, yes.
All right.
Yes, anyway.
Well, thanks to the 207 of you that stuck it out to the bitter end. You know that if you
apologize for the singing.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mark.
And yeah, I apologize for the out of tune singing, but there we go.
Anyway, thanks everybody for tuning in. We do like to have fun, although we take our work very seriously at SAFE, and we do work very hard to make the highest quality software we possibly can that makes your days and your work days more productive. We also like to try to have a bit of fun if we can, because let's face it, data translation, transformation could be kind of boring, so you got to spice it up a little bit. So thanks so much, Mark, for all your ingenuity and cleverness, and for being game to write a rap about shapefiles.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was fantastic, and yeah, any follow-up questions anyone's got, we're always happy to answer. And you can check us out on the community, knowledge.safe.com.
Yeah, the team will hang around a bit longer just to answer any last questions that come in. But until, I guess, a couple of weeks from now or whenever those other webinars are, thanks so much. Stay well out there, stay safe, and happy FMEing.
Thanks, folks. Bye.